Okay, welcome everyone to today's class. I will be explaining, we're still on the rural development series. I will be explaining the function of rural society and the meaning of development today. The expectation is that at the end of this session, you should be able to describe sociological investigations of rural society, which may be classified into four broad categories. You should be able to discuss the importance of rural society, the functions of rural society, social change as it affects rural society, and contemporary rural urban comparison. Our expectation is that at the end of today's session, you should be able to describe the meaning of development. You should be able to explain the dimensions of development as well as identify the steps in bringing about development. Now, let's talk about the sociological investigation and rural society. Sociological investigation of rural society may be classified into four broad categories. The first is the study using rurality as the independent variable. So we could study a rural society by using rurality as an independent variable. No, in research, we have dependent and independent variables. So in this case, when you are carrying out a sociological investigation of rural society, make rurality an independent variable. Remember, when it's an independent variable, it is the one causing changes to other variables. So the second classification of the investigation of rural society is comparative studies of rural society. So another classification is comparative studies of rural societies. The third one is studies for which rural society is the setting. That is, the study makes rural society the base, the place where the study is being carried out. So we are studying that rural society itself. So rural society is the setting. So meaning that within the society, the study could be within the family system, could be within the ecological system, could be within the cultural system or the personality system, and maybe other phenomena within that rural setting. Now, the fourth category of sociological investigation of rural society can be, is a broad category anyway, can be studies of social changes within each of the previous three we highlighted earlier. Remember, the first one is the studies using rurality as independent variable. The second one is carrying out a comparative study of the rural society, and the third one is studies that has the rural society as the setting for the study. So the fourth one is a combination of the first three. Now, what are the functions of rural society? The first function of rural society is that the rural society is involved in production of food and other raw materials. So one of the first functions is the production of food and other raw materials. Of course, you understand that the rural environment is agrarian most times, and therefore food is one of the outputs of the rural society. So it's one of its functions. The second function is the supplier. The rural society is the supplier of people to cities. You've heard the word rural urban migration. Why would there be a migration if people are lacking there? So people are not lacking in the rural areas. So people from the rural areas supply urban areas human resource, that's persons. So it's one of its functions is to supply people to the cities. The third function is the rural society is a custodian of natural resources. We call it custodianship of natural resources. Now, rural society plays that role because most natural resources are in rural areas. Petroleum, iron ore, coal, what have you. The fourth The fourth function of rural society is that it serves as a residence for people with urban centered resources of livelihood. What that means simply is that the rural society is a residence that most people that work in the urban area tend to go back to the rural society as as a residence. So it's a function that the rural society performs. The fifth is that the rural society perform a security function as represented by urban to rural or postponed rural to urban migration. Whenever migration takes place, it's either people are running away from something and running towards something. And that means when we say it performs a security function, for that man that is feeling insecure where he is, he aspires to go somewhere else. All right. So it also serves as a security function because it represents that urban to rural migration, because people still move from urban to rural areas. In case the urban area has an issue, people tend to head towards the rural area. So it serves that function. Now, there's another concept we'll talk about in this regard. Social changes in rural society. What is it all about? Now, it is noticeable that modernization of rural society in the North Americas, in Great Britain, in Western Europe has been ongoing for over a century and even more. But it has accelerated significantly in the 21st century, especially after the World War II. This modernization of rural society is deeply connected to the national and international systems, leading to similarities in the changes that their social organization experience. Traditional rural societies are also transforming, or we can say transitioning towards greater integration. All right. Now, this transformation of traditional isolated or segmented rural societies into modern integrated ones is a specific instance of broader societal change. Key changes include increased structural differences and specialization in social systems, the adoption of more universalistic norms, and the growth of rational orientation, as noted by scholars like Moore and Passing, have become predominant. So key changes are occurring in social changes are occurring in rural areas, bringing about changes that are noticeable in recent time. This discussion of social changes will focus on the following selected factors which have special significance for the rural social change of present day. One, the growth and application of technological and scientific knowledge. Now, it's observable that technology is growing, it's observable that scientific knowledge is growing and infiltrating the rural. This knowledge is infiltrating the rural areas. People can use those knowledge by a click of their hands. They can access it. Maybe they cannot get the technology, but they can access it and read through. Another is the increase of urbanization because of sufficient technological knowledge, scientific knowledge, integration that's happening in the rural areas. Most rural areas are fast changing to urban areas. That's why we say increase in urbanization. There's also the growth of money and market economy. And then lastly, the increase in purposive inventions, reflecting rationality and a favorable attitude towards change. These factors I highlighted so far may operate partly independently and partly in association, and may be in part and in some ways secular in their efforts. They operate generally as external forces for change in rural society and their social systems. The changes which these forces generate within rural communities in turn produce additional internal community changes. Now, let's discuss development briefly. Development can be defined as the general improvement in economic, social, and political condition of the whole society in terms of reduction and elimination of poverty, inequality, injustice, insecurity, ecological imbalance, and unemployment within the context of a growing economy. Generally, also, we can say development entails a shift, an upward shift this time, from one end to another and over a period of time. This is a positive development. Sometimes development can be negative depending on the situation, but this is not the kind of development that this series we are trying to focus on. Development goes beyond increase in per capita and financial aspect of people's lives. It includes changes in institutional, social, and administrative structures as well as social behaviors and attitude of people, including their customs and beliefs. It, it should um, it should be noted that development is a continuous process. It is unending. It goes on and on and on. What are the dimensions of development? We have the social development, we have economic development, we have political development, we have cultural development, we have religious development. All these developments are tied together, even though in theory distinctions can be made. All the aspects focus at raising the people's standard of living. From all the definitions we've given for development so far, the following conclusions can be reached. Development contributes to the well-being and comfort of the people. One. Two, development is a process and is continuous. Three, development is quantitative. That is, it increases per capital income of the people and it can be calculated. Four, development can be qualitative. Qualitative, what does that mean? It involves a total increase in the quality of people's life in the area of education, health, equality, security, social comfort, and so on. Lastly, development cannot be development if people don't have equal access. All right. It is not just the availability of roads, story buildings, cars, planes, electricity, and so on. If all these are available and the people do not have equal access to them, then we cannot say there is a development. Now, what are the steps in bringing about development? One, carry out an informal survey in an environment. Just carry out an informal survey. It can be called a fact finding and identification of community concerns. It's a fact finding survey. Carry that out. Two, identification of small group of leaders or interested groups who can serve as initiating sets. Number three, identification of immediate community problems. Identification of immediate community problems. Sharing of problems identified with community leaders for legitimacy, okay, is also another step. Now, the next is diffusion of problems and definition of needs. Then we talk about securing citizens' commitment to act and identification of needs, needed resources, because there's always going to be resources for mitigating these issues that have been raised. Then the next will be appraisal of available internal resources. That's to check what you have internally, and the invitation of external aids where it is necessary. Then formulation of detailed plan of action, including a timetable. After that, carry out the action and evaluating the entire process and the result. Then lastly, identification of derived problems or needs and planning for the continuation of the process. By derived problems or need, what we simply mean is those unanticipated effects of change after implementation. Okay, now so far we have talked about rural society, we've talked about the meaning of the function of the rural society. We've talked about the meaning of development and the dimensions of development. We also highlighted the steps involved in bringing about development. All right, thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in my next class.